If you felt that crash around 3 p.m. where your hands go a little shaky and your brain just stops working, if you've eaten a full meal and were starving again an hour later, if you've woken up more tired than when you went to sleep even after 8 hours, none of that is you being lazy and none of that is normal aging. That's your blood sugar rising and crashing like a wave you can't control. And most people never even know it's happening until the damage is already done. Here's what nobody tells you. You don't need a diabetes diagnosis for this to be destroying your energy, your mood, and your long-term health right now. Blood sugar spikes happen quietly, meal after meal, year after year, and they're one of the biggest hidden drivers of fatigue, weight gain, brain fog, and cravings you can't explain. So today I'm giving you 15 biblical foods that stabilize blood sugar naturally. Foods eaten thousands of years before glucose meters existed by people who never once thought about carbs or glycemic index, and yet somehow ate in a way that modern science now confirms kept their blood sugar remarkably stable. Some of these were literally at the center of the most famous test of self-control in the entire Bible. Stay with me, because number 5 was mentioned in a verse most people have read 100 times without ever realizing what it was really saying. Quick honesty moment before we start. I'm not a doctor and this isn't medical advice. If you're diabetic, pre-diabetic, or on any blood sugar medication like metformin or insulin, several of these foods can actually make your medication work too well and drop your blood sugar lower than you want. So talk to your doctor before adding them in, and I'll flag exactly which ones matter most as we go. Let's start with the one that began with a bowl of stew and a brother, who gave away his entire inheritance for it. Food 1. Lentils. A man once traded his entire birthright, his whole future, for one bowl of this. That's Genesis 25. Esau comes in from the field, starving, and sells his birthright to his brother Jacob for a bowl of red lentil stew. It's one of the most famous trades in human history, and it happened over a plate of lentils. Here's why that craving made sense biologically, even if the trade was a terrible idea. Lentils have a glycemic index of around 30, one of the lowest of any common food. A single cup gives you 18 grams of fiber and 18 grams of protein, and that combination does something specific. It slows the rate at which glucose enters your bloodstream after a meal. Studies on legume-rich meals show blood sugar spikes reduced by as much as 20% compared to the same meal without them. Interesting fact. Archaeologists have found lentil remains in Middle Eastern excavation sites dating back over 8,000 years, making them one of the very first crops humans ever domesticated. Before wheat, before rice. How to use it. A half cup of cooked lentils added to soups, salads, or alongside rice slows down the sugar spike from the rest of the meal, not just from the lentils themselves. Caution, generally very safe, but if you're on blood thinners, lentils' vitamin K content is worth mentioning to your doctor. Food 2. Barley. This grain fed 5,000 people with just 5 loaves, and it might be the single best blood sugar food in the entire Bible. Barley shows up constantly in Scripture. Ruth gleaning it in the fields, Gideon's dream, and the 5 barley loaves that fed the multitude in John's Gospel. It was the everyday grain of the poor, cheap, and abundant. Here's the science. Barley contains beta-glucan, a soluble fiber that forms a gel in your gut and physically slows down how fast sugar is absorbed. One study found that eating barley at breakfast lowered blood sugar levels not just after that meal, but at lunch the next day too, a phenomenon researchers call the second meal effect. Interesting fact. Ancient Roman gladiators were nicknamed hordeari, literally barley eaters, because their entire training diet revolved around it for sustained energy without crashes. How to use it. Swap white rice for pearled or hulled barley, or simmer it into a savory porridge with vegetables. Caution, contains gluten. Avoid if you have celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. Food 3. Bitter herbs. God commanded an entire nation to eat something bitter at the most important meal of their year. That wasn't a punishment. It was medicine. Exodus 12:8 instructs the Israelites to eat bitter herbs, maror, with the Passover lamb. Traditionally, this includes herbs like horseradish and bitter greens such as dandelion, chicory, and romaine lettuce roots, plants that grow wild across the Middle East. Here's why bitterness matters for blood sugar specifically. Bitter compounds stimulate bile production and activate bitter taste receptors that exist not just on your tongue but throughout your digestive tract. And research on bitter greens like dandelion shows they can improve how efficiently your body clears glucose from the blood after eating. Interesting fact, dandelion, one of the classic maror herbs, wasn't just eaten. Its root was roasted and used as a coffee substitute in poorer households for centuries. precisely because it didn't spike energy the way sugar or caffeine did. How to use it: a small side salad of bitter greens like arugula, chicory, or dandelion greens before a carb-heavy meal can blunt the spike that follows. Caution: if you have gallstones or a bile duct obstruction, check with your doctor before eating large amounts of bitter greens regularly. Food for vinegar Posca. This is the drink that was offered to Jesus himself on the cross, and it might be the most quietly powerful blood sugar tool in this entire list. Posca was just water, wine vinegar, and a pinch of salt, the everyday drink of Roman soldiers and the poor. In John 19:29, soldiers offered Jesus sour wine on a sponge at the crucifixion. That's the same drink. In the book of Ruth, Boaz invites Ruth to dip her bread in vinegar at mealtime. This wasn't unusual, it was normal life. Here's the science that surprises people. Multiple clinical studies show that 1 to 2 tablespoons of vinegar taken before a carb-heavy meal can reduce the resulting blood sugar spike by 20 to 30%. It works by slowing stomach emptying and interfering with the enzymes that break starches down into sugar. Interesting fact, this effect is strong enough that some endocrinologists actually recommend a vinegar water drink before meals as an informal tool for people managing blood sugar, decades before apple cider vinegar shots became a wellness trend. How to make it: 1 to 2 tablespoons of apple cider or red wine vinegar in a glass of water 10 to 20 minutes before a meal. Caution: this is exactly the kind of food that can make diabetes medication work too well, causing blood sugar to drop lower than intended. If you're on insulin or a sulfonylurea, talk to your doctor before using vinegar this way regularly. It's also acidic, so dilute it well and consider a straw to protect your enamel. 4 down, 11 to go, and the next one is a plant so obscure most Bible readers have walked right past it for their entire lives without knowing what it actually was. Food 5, black cumin Nigella sativa. Most people have read this verse a dozen times and had no idea it was describing one of the most studied blood sugar herbs on earth. Isaiah 28:25-27 describes a farmer scattering fitches, an Old English word for Nigella sativa known today as black cumin or black seed. The prophet uses it as an example of God's wisdom in agriculture, describing exactly how the seed is harvested without being crushed. Here's why this one deserves its own spotlight. In a review of clinical trials, black seed supplementation was shown to significantly lower fasting blood glucose and improve HbA1c, the long-term marker doctors use to track blood sugar control. Few single herbs on earth have this much research behind them for this specific purpose. Interesting fact, black seed has been found in the tomb of Tutankhamun, and the Prophet Muhammad reportedly called it a remedy for everything except death. 3 completely separate ancient civilizations, thousands of miles apart, all treating this same tiny seed as medicine. How to use it: a half teaspoon of ground black seed stirred into yogurt or tea daily, or the whole seed sprinkled over bread like sesame. Caution: this is another one that can amplify the effect of diabetes medication. If you're on any blood sugar lowering drug, check with your doctor before using it consistently. Avoid in pregnancy. Food 6, cinnamon. This spice was so valuable in the ancient world that it was part of the holy anointing oil God gave Moses the exact recipe for. Exodus 30:22-25 lists cinnamon by name as an ingredient in the sacred oil used to anoint priests and holy objects. It was that precious, reserved for the most sacred purposes in Israel's worship. The science backs up the reverence. Cinnamon contains a compound called cinnamaldehyde that appears to mimic insulin's effects and improve insulin sensitivity. A meta-analysis of multiple studies found cinnamon consumption lowered fasting blood glucose by a modest but meaningful amount, particularly in people with type 2 diabetes. Interesting fact, in the ancient world, cinnamon was so rare and expensive that Roman Emperor Nero reportedly burned a year's supply of it at his wife's funeral just to display his wealth and grief, a substance now sitting nearly forgotten in the back of most spice cabinets. How to use it: half a teaspoon of Ceylon cinnamon, not the cheaper cassia variety, which contains higher coumarin levels, stirred into coffee, oatmeal, or plain yogurt daily. Caution: cassia cinnamon in large amounts can stress the liver over time and, like the herbs above, can intensify diabetes medication. Choose Ceylon cinnamon and check with your doctor if you're on medication. Food 7, leeks. The Israelites cried out for this vegetable so badly in the desert that God recorded their complaint word for word. Numbers 11:5 lists leeks alongside cucumbers, melons, onions, and garlic as the foods the Israelites desperately missed from Egypt. This wasn't a minor craving. An entire chapter of the Bible exists partly because people missed their vegetables that much. Here's the modern relevance. Leeks are part of the allium family, along with onions and garlic, and they're rich in a compound called allicin, along with a specific type of fiber called inulin. Inulin acts as a prebiotic and has been shown to slow glucose absorption and improve insulin response, while alliums as a group are consistently linked in research to better blood sugar control. Interesting fact: ancient Egyptian laborers who built the pyramids were reportedly given rations of onions and leeks specifically because they were believed to sustain strength and stamina through brutal physical labor, a belief modern nutrition science has partly vindicated. How to use it: saute leeks as a base for soups and stews, or add them raw and thinly sliced to salads for maximum inulin content. No major cautions here. Leeks are gentle for nearly everyone, though very high amounts can cause digestive gas in sensitive individuals. Why this matters more than you think? Quick pause, because this needs to be said plainly. Blood sugar instability isn't just a diabetes issue. It's connected to the 3 p.m. crash, the sugar cravings you can't explain, the weight that won't move no matter what you cut, and the brain fog that makes you feel older than you are. Stabilizing it is one of the highest leverage things you can do for your energy and your long-term health. And the next food on this list was quite literally part of a science experiment recorded in Scripture. Food 8, legumes, Daniel's pulse. This food was part of an actual 10-day controlled experiment recorded in the Bible, arguably the first documented diet study in history. Daniel 1:12 describes Daniel and his friends asking to be tested for 10 days eating only pulse, a term referring to legumes and vegetables, instead of the rich royal food and wine offered by the king. At the end of the test, they appeared healthier than everyone who ate the king's food. Modern nutrition science explains exactly why that worked. Legumes like chickpeas, beans, and split peas combine fiber, protein, and resistant starch in a way that produces one of the flattest post-meal glucose curves of any food category. Studies replacing just one starchy side dish per day with legumes have shown measurable improvements in long-term blood sugar markers within weeks. Interesting fact: some historians believe pulse in Daniel's diet likely included chickpeas, which are still a dietary staple across the exact same region of the Middle East today. More than 2,500 years later, largely unchanged. How to use it: a half cup of chickpeas or beans added to salads, soups, or blended into hummus as a swap for a starchy side. Caution: legumes are high in fermentable fiber, which can cause bloating if you're not used to them. Increase your intake gradually. Food 9, walnuts. Solomon himself describes walking through the Garden of Nuts in one of the most romantic books of the Bible. Song of Solomon 6:11 describes going down to the Garden of Nuts, widely understood by scholars to reference walnut orchards, which were cultivated across the ancient Near East for their oil and their fruit. Here's the science. Walnuts are unusually rich in alpha-linolenic acid, a plant-based omega-3 fat, along with magnesium and fiber. This combination slows gastric emptying and blunts the insulin response to a meal. One study found that eating walnuts alongside a high-carb meal significantly reduced the resulting blood sugar spike compared to the same meal alone. Interesting fact: walnuts are one of the only nuts whose shape has been compared to a human brain for centuries, purely coincidental, but they also happen to be one of the best nuts for brain-protective omega-3s, which is a genuinely useful overlap. How to use it: a small handful, about 7 halves, eaten alongside a carb-heavy meal rather than as a separate snack for maximum blood sugar benefit. Caution: avoid if you have a tree nut allergy, and watch portions since walnuts are calorie-dense. Food 10, olive oil, Gethsemane, the place where Jesus prayed the night before his crucifixion, literally means oil press. The olive is everywhere in Scripture, the branch Noah's dove brought back, the oil that anointed kings and priests, and the very name of the garden where some of the most significant events of the Gospels took place. The science here is some of the strongest in this entire list. Olive oil is rich in monounsaturated fat, and multiple studies on the Mediterranean diet, which uses olive oil as its primary fat source, show consistent improvements in insulin sensitivity and post-meal blood sugar control. Adding olive oil to a carb-containing meal has been shown to significantly flatten the glucose spike that follows. Interesting fact: archaeologists have discovered olive oil residue in clay vessels dating back more than 8,000 years, and in ancient Greece, Olympic champions weren't given gold medals. They were crowned with a wreath cut from an olive tree. How to use it: a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil drizzled over vegetables or used in salad dressing, ideally consumed alongside your carbohydrates rather than separately. Caution: it's calorie-dense, so portion awareness matters if you're also managing your weight. Food 11, spelt Ezekiel bread. God gave a prophet an exact bread recipe to eat during a season of siege and hardship, and modern nutritionists still can't stop talking about it. Ezekiel 4:9 lists an unusual combination for bread: wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt, all mixed together. This wasn't a random recipe. It reflected eating whatever grains and legumes were available during a time of scarcity. Here's why that combination matters for blood sugar specifically. Mixing grains with legumes creates a more complete amino acid profile and, more importantly for glucose control, combines fibers and proteins from multiple sources that together produce a significantly lower glycemic response than bread made from refined wheat flour alone. Sprouted versions of this bread digest even more slowly, since sprouting partially breaks down starches before you even eat them. Interesting fact, this verse has inspired an entire modern product category. Sprouted multigrain Ezekiel bread is now sold in health food stores worldwide, one of the very few instances of a grocery store product being named directly after a Bible verse describing its exact ingredient list. How to use it. Look for sprouted whole grain bread containing a mix of grains and legumes, and pair it with protein or fat to further slow digestion. Caution, still contains gluten and carbohydrates. Portion control matters even with the healthier version, and avoid entirely if you have celiac disease. Food 12 Fenugreek. This seed was so central to ancient Near Eastern medicine that physicians 3,000 years ago were already using it for exactly what modern doctors study it for today. Fenugreek isn't named directly in most English Bible translations, but it grew wild and was cultivated across the exact regions where biblical events took place, and it appears in the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts in the ancient world used by Egyptian physicians in the same era as the Exodus. The research on fenugreek for blood sugar is some of the most consistent of any single food or herb. Its seeds are extremely high in a soluble fiber called galactomannan, which slows carbohydrate digestion, and multiple clinical trials show meaningful reductions in fasting blood sugar and improved glucose tolerance with regular fenugreek seed consumption. Interesting fact, fenugreek seeds are so effective at altering how the body processes sugar that eating enough of them can make your sweat and urine smell faintly like maple syrup. A harmless but well-documented side effect that has confused more than one person into thinking something was medically wrong. How to use it. Soak 1 teaspoon of fenugreek seeds in water overnight and consume both the seeds and the water in the morning, or use ground fenugreek in cooking. Caution. This is a strong one. It can significantly intensify the effect of diabetes medications and blood thinners, so anyone on those medications absolutely needs to check with their doctor first. Avoid in pregnancy. Food 13 Almonds. Jacob sent this exact nut as part of a gift to Egyptian officials during a famine, and generations later it became a sign of divine favor. Genesis 43:11 includes almonds among the gifts Jacob sends to Egypt when famine strikes his family. Later, in Numbers 17, Aaron's rod miraculously blossoms into almond flowers overnight as a sign of God's favor. The almond tree was even famous in ancient Israel for blooming earlier than any other tree each year. Here's the mechanism. Almonds are high in magnesium, fiber, and healthy fat, and eating them before or alongside a carbohydrate-containing meal has been shown in studies to reduce the resulting glucose spike by slowing digestion and improving the body's insulin response. Magnesium specifically plays a direct role in how your cells respond to insulin, and low magnesium levels are consistently linked to poorer blood sugar control. Interesting fact, because the almond tree blossoms before any other tree in Israel each spring, its Hebrew name, shaked, literally means the awakener. The same word the prophet Jeremiah places on in Jeremiah 1:11-12 when God shows him an almond branch as a sign that he is watching over his word to perform it. How to use it. A small handful, about a quarter cup, eaten 15 to 20 minutes before a higher carb meal. Caution, avoid if you have a tree nut allergy, and keep portions modest since almonds are calorie dense. Food 14, Fish. Some of the most famous meals in the entire Bible were built around this exact food, and it has essentially zero impact on blood sugar. From the feeding of the 5,000 with loaves and fish, to Jesus cooking breakfast for his disciples on the shore in John 21, fish from the Sea of Galilee appears again and again at pivotal moments in the Gospels. The relevance here is simple but important. Fish is pure protein and healthy fat with virtually no carbohydrate content, meaning it has almost no direct effect on blood glucose. More than that, research shows that eating protein and fat alongside carbohydrates, rather than carbs alone, slows gastric emptying and meaningfully blunts the resulting blood sugar spike. Fatty fish specifically adds omega-3s, which are separately linked to improved insulin sensitivity over time. Interesting fact, tilapia, one of the most common fish species in the Sea of Galilee, is still nicknamed Saint Peter's fish by locals and tourists today, a direct nod to the disciple who was a fisherman there 2,000 years ago. How to use it. Pair a palm-sized portion of fish with your carbohydrate-containing meals rather than eating starches on their own. The protein and fat slow down how fast that carb hits your bloodstream. Caution, if you're on blood thinners, be mindful of very high omega-3 intake and always check mercury guidance for higher mercury fish species if eating fish frequently. Food 15, flaxseed. This plant is mentioned in the middle of one of the most devastating plagues in the entire book of Exodus. Exodus 9:31 specifically notes that flax was destroyed by the plague of hail, which tells us how established and valuable this crop already was in Egypt at that time. Centuries later, Proverbs 31 describes the capable wife as someone who works skillfully with flax. Here's the science. Ground flaxseed is exceptionally high in soluble fiber, specifically a type that forms a thick gel in the digestive tract and physically slows the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream. Multiple studies show that adding ground flaxseed to meals measurably reduces the post-meal glucose spike, and regular consumption is linked to improved long-term blood sugar markers. Interesting fact. The linen wrapping King Tutankhamun's mummy was woven from flax grown over 3,000 years ago, the exact same plant whose seeds are now sold in health food stores specifically for blood sugar support. How to use it. 1 to 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed stirred into oatmeal, yogurt, or smoothies. It must be ground, not whole, or it passes through undigested and you get none of the benefit. Caution. Mild blood thinning effect. Mention it to your doctor if you're already on blood thinners, and introduce it gradually since the fiber content can cause bloating at first. So there they are, 15 biblical foods that modern research keeps circling back to for exactly the same reason ancient people leaned on them without ever knowing the mechanism. They slow down the sugar hitting your bloodstream. They support the way your body responds to insulin, and none of them required a lab to work. My personal pick out of all 15 is black seed. It's the least well-known food on this entire list. It has some of the strongest clinical research behind it of anything here, and it's sitting completely ignored in most spice aisles. One more time, because this one matters more than usual. Several of these foods, vinegar, cinnamon, fenugreek, and black seed especially, can genuinely intensify the effect of diabetes medication and drop your blood sugar lower than intended. If you're diabetic, pre-diabetic, or on any blood sugar medication, talk to your doctor before adding these in regularly. These foods are powerful, and for most people they're a real benefit, but they don't replace medical guidance. If this helped you, hit subscribe. Next time we're covering the biblical foods that naturally balance your hormones. And after seeing how much research backs up this list, I think you're going to want to see that one too. Take care of your body, take care of your blood sugar, and I'll see you in the next one.